A favorite of John Schneider's coming out of the 2022 NFL Draft. He finally got his man in Sam Howell coming to the Seahawks. But did Seattle give up too much to get what sums up as a backup quarterback right now? We're going to be discussing and debating on an early Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined for this early Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks by my co-host, Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you are listening in nearby Tacoma or if you're down in Fort Worth, Texas. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. In this case, 3 times a day. It has been a crazy day for the Seattle Seahawks, and we've got a blizzard. I am currently in Colorado. We've got blizzard conditions outside, so I'm worried about the electrical lines freezing up and not being able to get a show in on Friday. So we are doing things early here, a jam-packed Blue Friday episode. We'll look at the latest linebacker signing for the Seahawks. They finally have a veteran linebacker, and we'll have some week 1 free agency superlatives. It is going to be a jam-packed episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Yesterday, or in this case, earlier today, the Seattle Seahawks agreed to acquire quarterback Sam Howell from the Washington Commanders in what really amounts to a pick swap. The Seahawks sending a 3rd and 5th round pick to Washington and getting a 4th and 6th round selection in return. And this has created quite a divide. It's only been a few hours since this deal went down and the Seahawks announced it, and yet you really don't have a middle ground. You have one group that loves the trade, 23-year-old quarterback coming in, willing to do this. We're not trading down that far, going to 3rd or the 4th round, early 4th round pick. And then you have the other side of the aisle saying, wait, we didn't have a 2nd round pick. Why are we getting rid of one of our 3rd round selections? So, Nick, I'm going to let you have the mic here first, because I have a feeling that this might be one of the, I don't want to say that it's a huge disagreement, but this might be one of the biggest disagreements that we have ever had on Locked On Seahawks.
Well, first of all, greetings from beautiful, sunny Pasco, Washington, where it's about 62 and sunny right now. So, haha. Boy, what a few days for my 2 favorite pro teams, the Padres and the Seahawks, both making some big trades. And you know, look, what I'm gonna disagree on, you know, I'm gonna pump the brakes a little bit on being excited about this trade. And that has nothing really to do with Sam Howell, the quarterback prospect. I know that there's some flaws, but really, I'm going to call the Washington Commanders basically the NFC New York Jets as far as an organizational dysfunction standpoint. And I'm willing to recognize that some of those struggles or supposed cons of Sam Howell's game at this point could be just a classic case of Washington football team-itis. Really, it's about the trade, about the picks. I'm not going to say he's going to be a bust in Seattle. I'm not also ready to crown him the heir apparent of Geno Smith. It's about losing that 78 pick. It's about, you know, one less day 2 bullet. Basically, you know, that pick swap. You're moving down just about over 20 spots in both areas, both locations, which is, you know, almost a full round, about 2/3 of a round in both spots. So I'm not jazzed about that. And, you know, they're already lacking in day 2 picks. Now there goes another one for a guy who might not play all this coming season with Geno Smith, and, you know, Geno Smith under contract, you know, for 2 more seasons, who knows? Now you're down to 1 day 2 pick, down to 2 picks, Corbin, within the first 101 picks. And, you know, I was more on the train of maybe drafting, maybe going and getting a rookie quarterback, exciting one in the first couple rounds, having him behind Geno, and then you still had the firepower, or maybe trading down and getting more firepower in day 2, which they still could do, I guess, to address other needs. But really, for me, it's not Sam Howell, the quarterback, is my issue. It's the trade down and just the losing that much more firepower in day 2.
And here is why I vehemently disagree with most of the points you made. I do understand the argument about giving up one of those third round picks. And if the Seahawks were not picking early in the fourth round, yes, they're moving down 20 spots. That's significant. But a lot of times when you're trading for a quarterback, you have to give up more than that. And I've seen enough good plays on film. I know that Sam Howell threw 21 interceptions to lead the league in that category last year. But I also know that Washington did not really give him an opportunity to play at his best because there wasn't a run game. He threw more passes than any quarterback in the NFL, over 600 passing attempts last year. He was put in a situation where there was going to be quite a bit of failure, especially as a first-time starter in the NFL. And here's some of the other arguments that I have here why I like this trade. It isn't just because this is a player that I was high on personally. I know the Seahawks loved him coming into the 2022 NFL draft. I think he's got all the physical traits, the tools, the moxie, the toughness that you're looking for at the quarterback position. I really think he could be the heir apparent to Geno Smith. I'm not going to sit here and declare that right now, but I think he has the talent. I think the Seahawks believe that he has the talent to be that guy as well. But he's 23 years old. This is a quarterback class where players like Mike and Bo Nix that are probably going to be day 2 selections that are 5 and 7 months older than Sam Howell, respectively.
Yeah, he's the same age as Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, these guys, a lot of these quarterbacks coming into the league are old prospects for NFL draft prospects of the quarterback position. Now, there's benefits to that. Those guys should be ready to come into the league. But at the same time, Sam Howell's got 18 starts under his belt in the NFL, and he's 23 years old. He's a lot younger, and he's got those physical tools to go with it. So my argument is, looking at Seattle's situation, if you wanted to go up and get somebody like J.J. McCarthy, I would have loved them to be able to do something like that. But what ammunition do the Seahawks have to trade into the top 10? They don't, unless you're going to give up your next 2 first-round picks in 2025 and 2026 and a bunch of other picks on top of that. I mean, without a second-rounder, good luck moving up to get that guy. And Seattle could still draft a quarterback in the middle rounds. This does not deter them from doing that, but I do think that John Schneider was looking at the situation thinking, I really liked this kid 2 years ago. He's only 23, and now he's got 18 starts under his belt. We can see what he looks like against NFL competition. We watched him play extremely well against us in Seattle. Did not look like he was flustered at all playing in front of the loud 12s. I mean, he has some of those intangibles to play the quarterback position that John Schneider loves so much. So I understand pick 78, not having a second rounder. Now, I feel like it's imperative that you got to find a way to move down so that you can recoup some extra picks. You put yourself in that position. But at the same time, because he is younger than most of these quarterback draft prospects, he's got some really good tape. There's some bad tape as well, but Washington football team, that's what you look at. There's a lot of good tape with this kid. So for me, the fact that they did get a 4th and a 6th back and they still have the same number of selections, to me, it is a low risk, potentially a high reward gamble that I think is a better move for them with what assets they do have than they would have tried to trade up and get a quarterback.
Right. And just to kind of take the gas mask and inhale the copium, so to speak. That's I don't know why that's such a big word with like baseball Twitter with bad moves or something. Anyway, round 2, you selected Leonard Williams. Round 3, pick 78, you selected Sam Howell. Like you said, 18 career starts already in the NFL. That copium kind of smells good to me. So I can stomach that, I guess, a little bit. I do wonder, where on the spectrum of gunslingers, because that's kind of how I'd picture him, where on the spectrum between like Brett Favre and Ryan Leaf, Dan McGuire, is he on that spectrum? I'd like to think he's pretty far away from the Ryan Leaf, Dan McGuire category. But what I really like, I'll just end with this, is John Schneider's quote that, he says he's a quarterback, sure, but he's a football player. Yeah. I do like that kind of, that image. There's that image and like an aura in your mind when you hear something like that. So he's younger than Michael Penix, same age as Jaden Daniels. If you think of it as you just picked Sam Howell with your 78th pick, then yes, I can see this. I am excited. To see where this goes. I'm not ready to make any sort of shock jock declaration about his time in Seattle yet. I will pretty much be watching with bated breath.
Yeah, I do think this is a really intriguing deal. And it goes back to everything that I heard at the combine a couple years ago. I mean, it was made clear to me with sources that I talked to that John Schneider was smitten with this kid. He really liked him. They just were in a position with Drew Lock. He kind of was that same situation. He was 25, and Schneider talked about this publicly. He would have been one of the top quarterbacks picked in that draft, in his opinion. So they were looking at it from a perspective that we have a young quarterback here that we think there could potentially still be starter material here. And Geno Smith beat him out. Now they're trying it again with an even younger quarterback that, like Lock, had some success in his first starting opportunity, but there were also some mishaps. He got benched just like Lock did. So there are a lot of parallels there, even if they didn't come via the same type of trade. Lock was in that blockbuster Russell Wilson trade. This is clearly not of the same ilk in terms of giving up a bunch of mid-round picks and doing pick swapping. But still, there's a lot of similarities. I am very fascinated to see what this plays out. I know Geno is the guy right now, based on what John Schneider said, but I'm really curious to see what training camp looks like, because they're going to want to take a very close look at Sam Howell, especially with what they did giving up one of their third-round picks to bring him into the fold. Up next, we are going to shift to the defense. We've been clamoring for the Seahawks to sign a linebacker. They finally got it done today. We will be breaking down the addition of Tyrel Dodson to Seattle's defense. That'll be coming up next year on our early Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you could still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement, thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th, so get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. You're listening to an early Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, who's enjoying the sunny weather in Washington. It's much different than it is in Colorado. Let's just put it that way. But the Seahawks have been very busy the last few days. I know a lot of fans were getting impatient, media members. I will be included, just because I just couldn't believe how quickly players were flying off the board. And linebackers most specifically. John Schneider hit at it on Seattle Sports 710 today, Nick, that the Seahawks, it appeared that they were not expecting the linebackers to come off the board that quickly, and that includes Jordan Brooks. They were not able to quickly move on from the Leonard Williams deal to get Jordan Brooks locked up, and the Dolphins swooped in and got him, and we just saw a lot of linebackers sign quickly off the free agent market. So that's created some anxiety for Seahawk fans. Where are the linebackers? Who's going to replace Bobby Wagner, who's now with the Commanders? Who's going to replace Jordan Brooks? At least now we know one name that will be on defense for the Seattle Seahawks, as they have agreed to terms with former Bills linebacker Tyrel Dodson. Now, Nick, let's get to the positives here first. We were talking about the youth of Sam Howell. Dodson is only 25 years old. He has been in the league since 2019, but he only had 5 starts until last year. Played in 10 starts, replacing Matt Milano last season, and there were flashes of a really good starting linebacker. So I think that is clearly the first thing. You're talking about a guy that doesn't have much tread on the tires, and he's 25. This is still some moldable clay for Mike McDonald and his staff to work with.
Yeah, I do like the combo of a somewhat unproven young linebacker with Mike McDonald. I think that's going to be, I could see that working out wonderfully for them. And if you look at some of the grades, Corbin, in some aspects, or in some of the categories, he's the highest graded off-ball linebacker in football in some categories. Number 3, you mentioned in your article, number 3 in the and coverage as well. Some of the coverage grades were a bit mixed. He was charged with a 108.9 passer rating allowed and an 82.9 completion percentage allowed, but also, again, the third best coverage grade. So, pick your narrative, I guess. But certainly I like the analogy of moldable clay. There's enough ability there. There's enough youth there. When we're going to talk about superlatives in a minute with free agency signings, and Dodson is definitely on our lists in different categories. But I think we can both agree that there's definitely some upside here, especially with the coaching staff in place. I do like some of the numbers from this past year. He's really got a good pressure rate when he's sent on blitz. He has like the baseline to be a pretty good, well-rounded off-ball linebacker. He's got the blitz ability. He's got the run defense. He's got a bit of the coverage ability and the missed tackle rate and things like that. I do like that there's a good foundation perhaps to build on.
Yeah, I think this is a well-rounded player that still has a lot of room to grow. And something else that I like about him, he's 237 pounds. A lot of these linebackers that you're seeing flying off the shelves now are in that 225 to 230 range, your modern size linebacker. This guy's got enough size to him to play that off-ball linebacker spot in Mike Macdonald's system. He plays with relentless effort. That was quickly noticeable in film, the times I've seen him play before. This is a guy that plays to the whistle. He flies around making plays in the football. He's really athletic. He had a 26.8% pressure rate last year when he blitzed, so he was really efficient when the Bills sent him after the quarterback. And I think the other thing I love, he was in the top 10 among linebackers. And oh, by the way, there's another guy named Bobby Wagner that was right there with him. He was in the top 10 among linebackers on PFF charting for run stop percentage. So not just run stops. We're looking at the percentage of run plays that he made run stops that are considered failures for the offense. He was in the top 10. So he made a lot of impact plays. 8 tackles for loss starting just 10 games. That's pretty impressive. 2.5 sacks. He took advantage of his opportunities when the Bills sent him after the quarterback. I do think, and this is not based off of watching all the film. I have obviously not had time since signing to watch every game like I'm planning to do so, or at least a large chunk of them. But in the games that I was able to glance over, I think that the coverage stuff, you look at some of the things that were being graded favorably. He didn't have a lot of difficult, tricky tasks that he had to take in coverage, but when he had to defend crossers, it was a mixed bag at best. And so I'm not sure if I'm buying the idea that he was one of the top cover linebackers in the NFL, especially with the fact, as you said, passer rating over 100, completion rate over 82%. I mean, there are some things on the film that suggest I'm not sure where this grade is coming from. There's some good plays. I'm not going to say there's not, but I do think that is one of the risks when you're signing a guy like this that only has 15 career starts. You have seen what he's capable of in those games, but that's still a very small sample size. So it is a double-edged sword. On one hand, yeah, there's a lot of promise, and we have seen potential, but we haven't seen him be a starter for a full season. He only had 5 starts before last year. So there still is a limited sample size to really be able to know, is this guy going to be a featured piece at linebacker? Can he handle being the alpha in the room? And I'd be remiss not to mention also that there's some off-field concerns as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, that I didn't know a ton about him until I started reading, to be honest, and I was disappointed to read that, and it does concern me, and that's something that it's a gross subject. I hate diving into that, but certainly all we can hope for is that he's learned from it, and he's penitent, and he's moved on and become a better person. But really, it just strictly on the field here, that you can kind of paint him in a little bit of a picture like a Sam Howell. He's young, yeah, he's young, perhaps moldable, and we can't really declare anything with this new coaching staff, because much like on the offense with Sam Howell, who am I to say that there's no way that Dodson's not going to work? There's no way that he's going to work out here. He's got this and this and this kind of hole in his game. Same with Sam Howell on the offense. That it's just, there's so many unknowns with this coaching staff and this new regime that really they're I think the phraseology they've been I've seen is chasing edges. They're chasing those edges. They're trying to get ahead of stuff, and perhaps they're trying to get ahead of Tyrel Dodson's peak, which could be a very nice one.
And when you're in free agency, we speak on this all the time. And one of the things that I was concerned about with the Seahawks 3 or 4 years ago, they were signing a lot of players that were 30, 31, 32 older players that you just felt like there really isn't anywhere for them to go from a development standpoint. You want to pay guys based on what you're projecting. And so we don't know the financial details yet. Those have not been released. But if the Seahawks give Dotson a good multi-year deal with good money behind it, then they would be paying on the expectation that those 10 starts last year, we believe he can build off that. And you are paying for the traits, you're paying for the upside, the potential on a 25-year-old linebacker. Those are the type of moves you like to see teams make in free agency, especially when you're not breaking the bank. And at this stage, you shouldn't be, with so many other linebackers coming off the board, being signed to bigger contracts. So this fits the John Schneider mold in recent years, where they have been signing players like Uchenna Nwosu that are in their mid-20s that should be having their best football ahead of them. That move is paid off for the Seahawks. They're hoping Tyrel Dodson will be the same way at linebacker. We've had 1 week in the books of free agency, and it's been crazy. It has felt like a lot longer than that with all the moves that have happened. We are going to be diving into our free agency week 1 superlatives, best signing, and much more. That'll be coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney with March Madness officially underway. Whether you're betting on a big upset like Fairleigh Dickinson stunning Purdue last year as a 16 seed, or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new $100. That's if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all, whether you think it's going to be a blue blood like Duke or North Carolina, or maybe you think BYU is going to make a deep run into the tournament this year. All options are on the table at your fingertips. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. We're coming a little bit early here. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host here, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Make sure to check out on Locked On's National Sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, you got to mark your calendars, because March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, the best MLB season preview will be coming exclusively on Locked On Sports Today. Again, that's March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern. Be the first to get the local insight from MLB local experts of Locked On Podcast Network. Again, March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. We are now a week into free agency. It's crazy to believe that. Things fly once you get into the offseason, which, again, as David Harrison said on our crossover show earlier, that doesn't necessarily fit the bill, because this is as busy of a time of year as there is in the NFL. But nonetheless, we're a week in. It's time for our week 1 free agency superlatives. With all the action here, there's a lot of possibilities. The first category that we've got here, our first superlative, is the most valuable signing. That could be re-signings. That could be players brought in free agency. Nick, who gets the MVS here for the Seahawks offseason so far?
Marquez Valdez-Scantling? No, I'm just kidding. This was the 3-foot gimme putt, the layup, the base hit up the middle, Leonard Williams. That was just something we really wanted as fan base, just clamoring for it. Also, when you tie in that they gave away the 2nd round pick for him, great teams are built from the inside out, as we've been saying all offseason. Leonard Williams is an excellent piece to build around from the inside. Had more pressures on the interior defensive line last year than guys like DeForest Buckner, Fletcher Cox, and Jeffrey Simmons. He had a very fine season, played 18 games, which also is to be commended. So yeah, this was a pretty easy one for me.
Yeah, this one was easy for me too, because this was the foundation of the offseason. This is the move that John Schneider knew he had to make, and it wasn't just because of the compensation gave up for him at the trade deadline. You didn't want to have him walk away and be out of a 2nd round pick, but also it's the players. You said he had 32 pressures in 10 games with the Seahawks. That almost was the team lead for the entire season. That's how productive he was. He had 4 sacks, 11 quarterback hits, 9 tackles for loss. Maybe not quite as consistent as a run defender, but he is the perfect chess piece in Mike Macdonald's scheme, because in the past, he's liked to have guys who can move up and down the line, and you can do that. with Leonard Williams. He can play as a big end. He can play nose tackle. He played 3 tech. So this was clearly the most valuable signing for the Seahawks. They had to get this done. I know it may seem expensive, but that's what defensive tackles go for. These are guys that are real game wreckers, and it's hard to win when you don't have players like this in the trenches in today's NFL. Our next one, most overlooked signing. I actually had a really hard time with this because there's a few guys that jumped out to me as really good candidates for this one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the guy that, it kind of raised my eyebrow at first, but Tyrell Brown. He looks like the tight end that the Seahawks should be after if they want a tough-nosed physical identity. And while he might, I said overlooked because he's not going to get, even the Noah Fant receiving numbers or, insert great receiving tight end here kind of numbers. He's never going to do that probably. But he's been a rock solid blocker. And I think that you're going to quote the, 9th best overall blocking grade out of 37 qualified tight ends per PFF. So solid blocking grades, and he's not, incapable in the pass game. But I just really like that. It is kind of an underrated move, but I think it's another, a shift towards, I think, who they want to be in 2024, and that's tough-nosed.
Brown was one of the players that I considered. I also thought about Nick Harris for this one as well, just because Oluwatimi, everybody's expecting him to be the starter at center, but Harris is reuniting with Scott Huff, who's former offensive line coach at Washington. So he was my runner-up on this, but I'm actually going to go with one of the bigger names, and I'm going to still say it's an under-the-radar signing, and that's Rayshawn Jenkins, because you go and you watch the film, and he's not a superstar. He's never been a Pro Bowler. I do think he's been at that level a few of his seasons recently in Jacksonville. He just has a knack for coming up with big plays. As Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars said on our Thursday episode, this is a guy that has come through in clutch moments time and time again for the Jaguars. And when he was with the Chargers, he made some big plays once he started getting on the field on defense. He's 30 years old. I know he's not a young player necessarily, but I think there's a lot of good football left in him. He's a blue-collar player that does things the right way. He's fundamentally sound. He's assignment sound. That is going to be huge in what I think is going to be a more complex defense to be able to learn. This is a guy that'll be able to get the job done. So everybody's talking about him. I think he's a really good safety. And the fact that 49ers and Packers wanted him as well and the Seahawks got him, I think that's a good thing for Seattle's secondary. He's got some positional versatility. So I think he's still an under-the-radar guy that has a chance to be a really nice addition for the Seahawks. Our next one here, the biggest head-scratcher, and this could be players the Seahawks didn't go after. It could be players they let walk. It could be contracts that they handed out. What's the biggest head-scratcher to you so far this free agency period?
Well, this isn't really a knock on the player. It's not, head scratching for me was, oh, really? Okay. Was Noah Fant. Noah Fant coming back. And we both kind of agreed that he's probably going to move on with this free agency wave. But along the same vein as the Tyrel Brown, I was just surprised stylistically that they're going to bring back Noah Fant. Kind of just seemed like the Seahawks were wasting his talent last year. Now, again, brand new regime, brand new system. I get it. Perhaps Ryan Grubb and company dangled a larger role in the offense as far as, in the negotiations to bring him back. Obviously, uber talented. He's got all the tools you want in a tight end. And I think that was part of why I thought he was gone. And never been accused of being a great blocker, Noah Fant. But now that you got Tyrel Brown in the fold as well, perhaps that it won't be as necessary because Tyrel Brown can maybe fill that Will Disley role. But I think he's a great player. I was just really surprised that maybe there's a shift in how they want to use him, but I was just surprised he came back at all.
This was one of the easy ones for me just because I look at Jordan Brooks' contract that he signed with the Miami Dolphins, where the APY, the average per year, is under $8.5 million per year. I thought the Seahawks would be willing to pay him 10 or so million per year. And the way that John Schneider described it today, I talked about it earlier on Seattle Sports. He was basically saying they didn't anticipate the linebacker was going to come off the board the way they did. And the negotiations with Leonard Williams were so intense that they weren't able to get to Brooks quick enough. I'm not necessarily buying that. I don't know how you didn't have a deal in place to be able to match. I was stunned that they didn't. So to me, that's the biggest head scratcher. And we talked about Tyrel Dodson. I like the player, but man, I would have liked to see Tyrel Dodson and Jordan Brooks together potentially. I don't know if they financially could have done that, but I think that Jordan Brooks, that's the biggest head scratcher to me because he's still in his prime of his career. And I think there's a lot of good football. And I was just really excited to see him with Mike Macdonald and see what Mike Macdonald could do with him, like he did with Patrick Queen the last couple of years. Queen was viewed as a bust his first couple of years in the league. I wanted to see what Mike Macdonald could do. And unfortunately, we're not going to get a chance to see that. All right, our next category here, and that's the boom or bust signing, the one that could work out really well or could be a disaster. Nick, which one takes that category for you?
I kind of cheated a little bit, and I went more with the boom or milquetoast, boom or meh kind of signing, and that's Rayshon Jenkins. Because like you mentioned, he's got some Pro Bowl qualities and back-to-back 100-tackle seasons. They're again, much like Dodson, there's some disparity in Pro Football Focus grades versus his passer rating allowed as far as his coverage goes. I think he's got that veteran presence. The fact that he's now 30, is there going to be eventual drop-off for him? Who knows? I did like that he had the 11th most offensive stops, like you mentioned, where the offense is constituted as a failure on that play. He had the 11th most stops among safeties last year. So a willing tackler brings it. Maybe the coverage is a mixed bag, but it's more of a boom. Like he could become that next level under Mike Macdonald and become perhaps a Pro Bowl safety, or okay, that was an okay signing. He's there. He'll be fine, but nothing special.
Yeah, I think Dodson is clearly the boom or bust of the guys signed here, because I think if he hits, he could be a Pro Bowl, maybe even all-pro caliber player, because you see the instincts, the ability to fly around the field. He's a really good run defender. There are flashes as a pass rusher. If this kid is able to put everything together, and we know what Mike Macdonald has done coaching up linebackers, again, what he did with Patrick Queen, if he really likes Tyrel Dodson and how young he is, this is a player that could really soar in this defense. At the same time, I mentioned this earlier, he's got 15 career starts. There's not a lot to work off of. There's a lot of projection to this signing, making him a full-time starter. So if he's not ready for that, if he can't handle the complexity of this defense, there's a lot of different wrinkles to this. There's a potential the Seahawks could get into the season and be looking at John Radigan and some of the guys on the roster. Hey, are you going to be able to handle this better than this kid is doing? We might need to make a change. So I do think there's boom or bust to that signing. Real quick, our last one, the wild card signing, maybe the one that, it could have a bigger impact than expected. It's one that maybe isn't getting talked about enough. Just a general wild card. Which one takes the cake for you, Nick?
I kind of went boom or bust more with a wild card, and that's Dodson for me. Like all the points you mentioned, I don't want to rehash everything you said because it's true. He could become a Pro Bowl. I could see a world where he becomes a Pro Bowl level off-ball linebacker under the tutelage of Mike Macdonald, a la Patrick Queen. But yeah, he could amount to being Devin Bush or worse. Who knows? But yeah, so wild card for me, kind of in that same vein.
Yeah, I'm going with George Fant, and it goes off the episode that I had on Thursday where I was discussing Abraham Lucas's health and the fact that the Seahawks gave Fant a contract worth up to $14 million. Schneider was saying today they expect that he's just going to be used in packages as an extra blocker like they did before, but that may be optimistic thinking. The contract suggests to me that Seattle still may have some reservations about Abraham Lucas. They got to wait and see what he looks like. Can he stay on the field without that knee flaring up again after having surgery? So this really is more than an insurance policy. This is a guy that started a lot of games. You got to make sure you have that backup plan ready to go, and they paid him accordingly. So he could be a wild card. If Abe Lucas doesn't stay healthy, you still have knee issues, you may see a lot of George Fant in the lineup, and they're going to be counting on him to be able to step in and play as well as he did for the Texans last year, where he had a pretty good season. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at Nick Lee 51. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Free agency is in the heat of the moment right now. There may be some bonus episodes coming up depending on the signings that are released here in the next few days. We are going to have more activity as the Seahawks continue to build their roster. But at worst, we'll have mock draft Monday returning on Monday, diving into some of the mock drafts out there in the aftermath of the first few waves of free agency. Make sure that you listen in. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the festivities of free agency. Go Hawks.